Hello everyone, my name is Yianca, and for my Systems Project 2, I will be discussing how gas exchange and osmoregulation evolved during the transition from aquatic vertebrates to terrestrial vertebrates. And I'll explain how the environmental pressures shape these systems, and I will be highlighting two organisms that demonstrate those important adaptations. So let's begin. What is gas exchange and osmoregulation? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Gas exchange is obtaining oxygen and removing carbon dioxide, and then the osmoregulation is maintaining the proper water and ion balances. So early vertebrates lived completely in water, and they were breathing and maintaining their water balance was pretty straightforward. But as they began to explore the land, they encountered some challenges, and some of those were gravity, the dry air, the dehydration, and the new oxygen availability. So these environmental pressures drove major evolutionary changes. Um, and now let's move on to the early lobe finfish. So this stage marks the first major evolutionary steps toward the terrestrial life, I would say. Many shallow freshwater habitats, they experienced a lot of low oxygen concentrations, and the primitive lungs allowed the fishes to gulp a lot of the oxygen while their gills continued functioning underwater. So in this case, yeah, because of the environment, the pressure of the environment, the oxygen in the shallow water wasn't enough, and then there were a lot of seasonal droughts, you know, a lot of them had to move to land. And now moving on to the Tika, I'm gonna mess this up, Tikalik. This is an excellent fossil that represents the transition. It still relied heavily on water, but it possessed lungs capable of supplementing their respiration. So the enlarged ribs most likely supported their breathing and protected the internal organs while spending some time in the shallow water. But still mainly aquatic. So, and for the Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, I hope I'm saying that right. So, although these two animals are often thought of as early land vertebrates, I think they still remained closely tied to aquatic environments. Their lungs became more efficient, but they still depended on water for reproduction, and they retained their larval respiratory characteristics. So their gills were still present, their moist skin still allowed for some respiration, and their rib ventilation did improve a lot. And it kind of helped, I think, a little bit when they moved onto the land or transitioned onto the land. And it was also, I think, beneficial for them because they had access to new food sources as well. And now for the reptiliomorphs and early tetrapods. So, as the vertebrates spent more time on land, they relied on their moist skin. It became increasingly very it became more disadvantageous because it led to more water loss, or it was easier to lose water that way. So the respiratory systems became more efficient, and the kidneys, had to improve their water conservation as well. So because they were exposed to more dry environments, I feel like they were forced almost to make these adaptations and these changes. And for the amphibians, so modern amphibians, they demonstrate both strengths and limitations of these transition adaptations. So their skin, their permeable skin, it allowed the oxygen exchange, but it also, like on the flip side, it also caused very rapid dehydration. And it explained why most amphibians still remain they still kind of stay closely associated with moist environments or humid environments or near some type of water. So now for the amniotes, I hope I'm saying that right again. So their skin is pretty waterproof, and this was the evolution of the amniotic egg, and their waterproof skin represents one of the greatest evolutionary breakthroughs, I think, in vertebrates. And these innovations really allowed these animals to reproduce and survive in the drier habitats. The internal lungs became the primary lungs. Their urine was more concentrated, and yeah, they had complete independence from standing water. So, and now for the modern reptiles, I'd say the modern reptiles possess really efficient systems for preventing their dehydration. Rather than losing large amounts of water through their urine, they excrete uric acid. So they conserve a lot of water during very hot environments, very dry and hot environments. And for the axolotl, again, forgive me for if I'm saying this wrong. So, to me, this animal is very fascinating because it never really fully underwent metamorphosis. Instead, it retained its external gills throughout its adulthood, and it kind of also made it an excellent example of how evolutionary can favor maintaining some characteristics because it can still remain, advantageous. So, and for the desert tortoise, it demonstrates, I'd say, some of the best water conservation adaptations because it can survive for long periods of without rainfall, and it stores water, or they store water internally, and they minimize a lot of their water loss with their lungs, and a lot of the water remains stored in their bladder as well. And now to finish this off, I say the transition from water to land required a lot of evolution, coordinated evolution across many body systems. But the gas exchange and osmoregulation, I think they evolved closely together. It allowed the vertebrates to exploit entirely new habitats and eventually, you know, diversify into this big variety of animals that we now see today. And these are my citations for today's presentation. Again, thank you if you made it this far. Forgive my spelling errors or pronunciation errors, I'd say. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Bye.